So back at it again. Need to take my mind off of the general fuckery that is happening in our country and all of that. Literally at a loss for words. But, I mean, what can you do? We all just need something. And right now I know it's just like fucking... almost like a game of Russian roulette. Are we gonna get a fascist dictatorship? Maybe, maybe not. But, I don't know. I'm gonna read a book. So, to pick up where we left off, we are at chapter 10 of The Island of Dr. Moreau. I'm not going to recap the whole thing. I put all this shit on the internet. You can look at it if you want to figure out what the hell's going on. Or you can Wikipedia it. I mean, fuck, it's entirely possible that you can just read the book yourself. I don't know. I don't know. So, chapter 10. Let's just get into it. The Crying of the Man. As I drew near the house, I saw that the light shone from the door. Oh, fuck. I'm not gonna restart this whole thing. I don't know how to edit. So I gotta do it all at one take. Chapter 10. As I drew near the house, I saw that the light shone from the open door of my room, and then I heard, coming out from the strange darkness at the side of the orange oblong, the voice of Montgomery shouting, "Prendick!" I continued running. Presently I heard him again. I replied by a feeble, "Hello?" and in another moment had staggered up to him. "Where have you been?" said he, holding me at arm's length, so that the light from the door fell upon my face. "We have both been so busy that we forgot about you until about a half hour ago." He led me into the room and sat me down in the deck chair. For a while I was blinded by the light. "Ripped up like a doozy in the night." Sorry, I mean, when that comes up, you just gotta do that. Break the story, keep going. "We did not think you would start to explore the island of ours without telling us," he said. And then, "I was afraid. But, what? Hello?" For my last remaining strength slipped from me, and my head fell forward upon my chest. I think he found a certain satisfactory in giving me brandy. "For God's sake," said I, "fasten the door." "You've been meeting some of our curiosities, eh?" said he. He locked the door and turned to me again. He asked me no questions, but gave me some more brandy and water and pressed me to eat. I was in a state of collapse. He said something vague about forgetting to warn me and asked me briefly when I left the house and what I had seen. I answered him as briefly in fragmented sentences. "Tell me what it all means," said I, in a state bordering on hysterics. "It's nothing so dreadful," said he. "But I think you have been about enough for one day." The puma suddenly gave a sharp yell of pain. At that he swore under his breath. "I'm damned. If this place is not as bad as Gower Street, with its cats. Montgomery, what was the thing that came after me? Was it a beast or was it a man? If you don't sleep tonight," he said, "you'll be off your head tomorrow." I stood up in front of him. "What was the thing that came after me?" I asked. He looked me squarely in the eyes and twisted his mouth askew. His eyes, which had seemed animated a minute before, went dull. "From your account, I'm thinking it was a boggle." I felt a gust of intense irritation that passed as quickly as it came. I flung myself into the chair again and pressed my hands on my forehead. The puma began again. Montgomery came around me and put his hand on my shoulder. Look here, Prendick. I had no business to let you drift out into the silly island of ours. But it's not so bad as you think, man. Your nerves are worked to rags. Let me give you something that will help make you sleep. That will keep on hours yet. You simply must get to sleep, or I won't answer for it. I did not reply. I bowed forward and covered my face with my hands. Presently he returned with a small measure containing a dark liquid. This he gave to me. I took it unresistingly, and he helped me into the hammock. When I woke, it was broad day. For a little while I lay flat, staring at the roof above me. The rafters, I observed, were made of the timbers of the ship. Then I turned my head and saw a meal prepared for me on the table. I perceived that I was hungry and prepared to clamber out of the hammock, which, very politely anticipating my intentions, twisted round and deposited me on all fours on the floor. I got up and sat down before the food. I had a heavy feeling in my head and only a vaguest memory of the things that had happened overnight. The morning breeze blew very pleasantly through the unglazed window, and that and the food contributed to the sense of animal comfort I experienced. Presently, the door opened behind me. The door inwards towards the yard of the enclosure opened. I turned and saw Montgomery's face. "All right," said he. "I'm frightfully busy." And he shut the door. Afterwards, I discovered he forgot to relock it. Then I recalled the expression of his face the previous night, and with that the memory of all I had experienced reconstructed itself before me. Even as the fear returned to me, came a cry from within. But this time it was not the cry of a puma. I put down the mouthful that hesitated upon my lips and listened. Silence, save for the whisper of the morning breeze. I began to think my ears had deceived me. After a long pause, I resumed my meal, but with my ears still listening vigilantly. Presently I heard something else very faint and low. I sat as if frozen in my attitude. Though it was faint and low, it moved me more profoundly than all I had hitherto heard of the abominations behind the wall. There was no mistake this time in the quality of the dim broken sounds. No doubt at all of their source, for it was a groaning broken by sobs and gasps of anguish. It was no brute this time. It was a human being in torment. And as I realized this, I rose and in 3 steps had crossed the room, seized the handle of the door into the yard and flung it upon me, and flung it open before me. "Prendick, man, stop!" cried Montgomery, intervening. A startled deerhound yelped and snarled. There was blood I saw in the sink, brown and some scarlet, and I smelled the peculiar smell of carbolic acid. Then, through an open doorway beyond, in the dim light of the shadow, I saw something bound painfully upon a framework, scarred, red, and bandaged. And then, blotting this out, appeared the face of old Moreau, white and terrible. In a moment he had gripped me by the shoulder with a hand that was smeared red, had twisted me off my feet, and flung me headlong back into my own room. He lifted me as though I was a little child. I fell at full length upon the floor, and the door slammed and shut out the passionate intensity of his face. Then I heard the key turn in the lock, and Montgomery's voice in exposition. I don't know that word. "Ruin the work of a lifetime," I heard Moreau say. "He does not understand," said Montgomery, and the other things that were inaudible. "I can't spare the time yet," said Moreau. The rest I did not hear. I picked myself up and stood trembling, my mind a chaos of the most horrible misgivings. Could the vivisection of men be possible? The question shot like lightning across the tumultuous sky, and suddenly the clouded horror of my mind condensed into a vivid realization of my danger. So, yeah, it's pretty terrible. I mean, things aren't going too great in the real world, but it's great that I'm in my little Manchester apartment and I don't have to walk outside and see people being carved up. That'd be kind of a rough way to go about it. So eventually, kind of later down in the story, they're gonna kind of get into some of the themes of what it's like to play God, really. Um, right now, all we know in the story is that Moreau, the doctor of the island, on the island of Dr. Moreau, he's doing cruel experiments with living things. At first, our protagonist, narrator, Prendick, is thinking that he's doing them on animals, but now he thinks he's doing it on people. And I talked in a couple stories ago about the vivisection arguments that were being argued in the time that Wells wrote this novel. But now, as we get into it, it'll be more interesting later on. It's going to get kind of more into questions of what makes a person, what's it's like to play God. Moreau is either turning people into animals or animals into people. So what's that mean for the human soul? Do you lose your soul if you get turned into an animal? Do you gain a soul if you're an animal that gets turned into a people? And all that. So, yeah, there's your fucking spoiler alert, I guess. We're gonna do one more chapter and call it quits for the evening. Well, we kinda wait for election results. I'm gonna find my cigarettes. Boom, found them. Probably shouldn't be smoking. Terrible for you. What can you do? So chapter 11, entitled The Hunting of the Man. If you're in a metal band, you it's kind of a given title. You should use that. Anyway. It came before my mind with an unreasonable hope of escape that the outer door of my room was still open to me. I was convinced now, absolutely absurd, that Moreau had been vivisecting a human being. All the time since I had heard his name, I had been trying to link in my mind in some of the ways the grotesque animalism of the islanders with his abominations. And now I thought I saw it all. The memory of his works and the transfusion of blood recurred to me. These creatures I had seen were the victims of some hideous experiment. These sickening scoundrels had merely intended to keep me back, to fool me with their display of confidence, and presently to fall upon me with a fate more horrible than death, with torture, and after torture the most hideous degradation it was possible to conceive, to send me off, a lost soul, a beast, to rest of their commiserate. I looked round for a weapon. Nothing. Then, with an inspiration, I turned over the deck chair, put my foot on the side of it, and tore away the side of the rail. It happened that a nail came away with the wood, and projecting gave a touch of danger to an otherwise petty weapon. I heard a step outside, incontinently flung open the door, and found Montgomery within a yard of it. He meant to lock the outer door. I raised this nailed stick of mine and cut at his face, but he sprang back. I hesitated a moment, then turned and fled around the corner of the house. "Prendick!" I heard his astonished cry. "Don't be a silly ass, man!" Another minute, thought I, and he would have had locked me in, and as ready as a hospital rabbit for my fate. He emerged behind the corner, for I heard him shout, "Prendick!" Then he began to run after me, shouting things as he ran. This time running blindly, I went northeastward in a direction at right angles to my previous expedition. Once, as I went running headlong up the beach, I glanced over my shoulder and saw his attendant with him. I ran furiously up the slope, over it, then turned eastward towards a rocky valley fringed on either side with the jungle. I ran perhaps a mile altogether, my chest straining, my heart beating in my ears, and then, hearing nothing of Montgomery or his man, and feeling upon the verge of exhaustion, I doubled back sharply, back towards the beach, as I judged, and lay down in the shelter of a canebrake. There I remained for a long time, too fearful to move, and indeed too fearful even to plan a course of action. The wild scene about me lay sleeping silently under the sun, and the only sound near me was the thin hum of some small gnats that had discovered me. Presently I became aware of a drowsy breathing sound, the soughing of the sea upon the beach. After about an hour I heard Montgomery shouting my name far away to the north. That set me thinking of my plan of action. As I interpreted it then, this island was inhabited only by these two vivisectors and their animalized victims. Some of these, no doubt, they could press into their service against me if indeed arose. I knew both Montgomery and Moreau carried revolvers, and save for my feeble bar of deal spiked with a small nail, the merest mockery of a mace, I was unarmed. So I lay still where I was unable to begin to think of food and drink. So I lay still where I was until I was... fucking Christ. So I lay still where I was until I began to think of food and drink. Holy shit. And at that moment, the real hopelessness of my position came home to me. I knew no way of getting anything else to eat. I was too ignorant of botany to discover any resort of root or fruit that may lie about me. I had no means of trapping the few rabbits upon the island. It grew blanker the more I turned the prospect over. At last, in the desperation of my position, my mind turned to the animal men I had encountered. I tried to find some hope in what I remembered of them. In turn, I recalled each one I had seen and tried to draw some augury of assistance from my memory. Then suddenly, I heard a stage-hound bay, and at that I realized a new danger. It took little time to think, or they would have caught me then, but snatching up my nailed stick, rushed headlong from my hiding place towards the sound of the sea. I remembered a growth of thorny pines, with spines that stabbed me like penknives. I emerged bleeding with torn clothes upon the lip of the long creek opening northward. I went straight into the waves without a minute's hesitation, wading up the creek, and presently finding myself knee-deep in a little stream. I scrambled out at last on the westward bulwark, on the westward bank, and with my heart beating loudly in my ears, crept into a tangle of ferns to await the issue. I heard the dog, it was only one, draw near and yelp when it came to the thorns. Then I heard no more, and presently began to think I had escaped. The minutes passed, the silence lengthened out, and at last, after an hour of security, my courage began to return to me. By this time I was no longer very terrified or very miserable, for I had, as it were, passed the limit of terror and despair. I felt now that my life was practically lost, and that persuasion had made me capable of daring anything. I had even a certain wish to encounter Moreau face to face. And as I waded into the water, I remembered that if I were too hard pressed, at least one path of escape from torment still lay open to me. They could not very well prevent me from drowning myself. I had half a mind to drown myself then, but an odd wish to see the whole adventure out, a queer and personal specular interest in myself, restrained me. I stretched my limbs, sore and painful from the prickly spikes of the spiny plants, and stared around me at the trees, and so suddenly that it seemed to jump out of the green tracery about it, my eyes lit upon a black face watching me. I saw that it was the simian creature who had met the launch upon the beach. He was clinging to the oblique stem of a palm tree. I gripped my stick and stood up facing him. He began chattering. You, was all I could distinguish at first. Suddenly he dropped from the tree and in another moment was holding the fawns apart and staring curiously at me. I did not feel the same repugnance towards the creature that I had experienced in my encounters with the other beastmen. You, he said, in the boat. He was a man then, at least as much of a man as Montgomery's intendant, for he could talk. Yes, said I. I came in the boat from the ship. Oh, he said, and his bright, restless eyes traveled over me, to my hands, to the stick I carried, to my feet, to the tattered places in my coat, and the cuts and scratches I had received from the thorns. He seemed puzzled at something. His eyes came back down to my hands. He held his own hand out and counted his digits slowly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I did not grasp this meaning then. Afterwards, I was to find that a great proportion of these beast people had malformed hands, lacking sometimes even 3 digits. But guessing this was in some way a greeting, I did the same thing by way of a reply. He grinned with immense satisfaction. Then his quick roving glance went round again. He made a swift movement and vanished. The fern fawns he had stood between came swishing together. I pushed out of the break after him and was astonished to find him swinging cheerfully by one lank arm from a rope of the creepers that had looped down from the foliage overhead. His back was to me. Hello, said I. He came down with a twisting jump and stood facing me. I say, said I, where can I get something to eat? Eat? Eat man's food now. His eyes went back to the swing of ropes. At the huts. Sorry, I'm fucking with my... I like listening to music while I do this. But apparently YouTube doesn't work. But where are the huts? Oh, I'm new, you know. At that he swung around and set off on a quick walk. All his motions were curiously rapid. Come along, said he. I went with him to see the adventure out. I guess the huts were some rough shelter where he and some more of the beast people lived. I might perhaps find them friendly, find some handle in their minds to take hold of. I did not know yet how far they were from human heritage I ascribed to them. My ape-like companion trotted along by my side, with his hands hanging down and his jaw thrust forward. I wondered what memory he might have in him. How long have you been on this island? Said I. How long? He asked, and after having the question repeated, he held up 3 fingers. The creature was little better than an idiot. I tried to make out what he meant by that, and it seemed I bored him. After another question or 2, he suddenly left my side and sprang at some fruit that hung from a tree. He pulled down a handful of prickly husks and went on eating the contents. I noted this with satisfaction, for here at least was a hint for feeding. I tried him with some other questions, but his chattering prompted responses were, as often not, at cross purposes with my question. Some few were appropriate, others were quite parrot-like. I was so intent upon these peculiarities that I scarcely noted the path we followed. Presently we came to trees, all charred and brown, and so to a bare place covered with yellow-white incrustation, along which went a drifting smoke pungent in whiffs to the nose and eyes. On our right, over a shoulder of bare rock, I saw the level of the blue sea. The path coiled down abruptly into the narrow ravine between two tumbled and knotty masses of black soresh. Into this we were plunged. It was extremely dark, this passage, after the blinding sunlight reflected from the sulphurous ground. Its walls were steep and approached one another. Blotches of green and crimson drifted across my eyes. My conductor stopped suddenly. "Home," said he, and I stood on the floor of the chasm that was at first absolutely dark to me. I heard some strange noises and thrust the knuckles of my left eye into my hands. Switch that around and reverse it. I became aware of a disagreeable odor like that of a monkey's cage, ill-cleaned. Beyond, the rock opened again, and a gradual slope of sunlit greenery, and on either hand the light smote down through a narrow channel into the central gloom. That's it for that. When I read this whole thing, it's not super accurate. Because one, I'm usually drunk when I do it, and two, I don't know, I've never had to read things out loud since I was a child. So, you get what you get. I don't know. Really have nothing else to say. Later on in the story, we get to hang out with the Beast People. Are they not so bad? Are they gonna eat our guy? I don't know. It's just, fucking... Yeah. I'm gonna get more into what the story means and all that. I know I talked about that a little bit, getting into the history behind it and all of that, but I just don't feel like doing it right now. I hope everybody has a good night, and that's about it.